Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session on choosing a research design. I will be taking you through that process. So my name is Colin Saudi. I'm a monitoring, evaluation, and research specialist, and I am currently a research mentor at ADA Africa. So let's dive deep into the topic. So what is a research design? So I came up with this overall definition of what a research design is to give you an overall overview of what it entails. So basically, it's the overall strategy or a blueprint of your research study. So it's like an umbrella term. So I do give an example. Think of it like building a house. If you want to build a house, where do you normally start? We usually start by having a design of our choice in our mind, or a plan. Then we have this design put down on paper, of the overall house that we want to have. So before even we start procuring building materials. So similar to that case or that example, a research design is the overall strategy you are going to use to answer your research questions. So think of it like the design of the house you have in mind. Then what comes thereafter are this different set of methods and procedures that will be used. So let us go on and see more about research design. So if we have a research design, then we are going to have procedures on the required data, the methods that we need to apply to collect and analyze this data, and how all this is going to answer the research questions, as put clearly by Gray, 2014. So that's why it is very important to choose the right research design. If we choose the wrong design, then it means we are going to use the wrong sets of procedures or standards to answer those research questions. So for instance, if we choose an exploratory design, then there are standards on what are the desired, for instance, data collection methods for exploratory design, what are the most appropriate sampling procedures for exploratory. So the design is very important. It will set all those procedures needed to answer the research questions. So what do we mean if we say a good research design? So we mean a design that will produce you the result that represent the real properties or characteristics of something or that particular research topic. A good design is also that one which minimizes distortion from the truth, or what we call the bias, as it also maximizes how reliable your data is. It will also ensure that you have adequate sample size of the research group so that you can be able to generalize the findings from your study. Remember, the research design will also determine how you sample from the study population. So a good research design will also give you maximum information that you need, while it also minimizes the error in your study. So how do we choose a good research design? So before I go to the steps, I would like us to understand what we call a research approach. It's very important first to understand your approach before you choose the most appropriate study design. So a research approach basically refers to how your research is going to collect data in the field, or the kind of data that you are going to collect in the field could be qualitative or quantitative data. So let's go into each of the approach and see what they entail. So quantitative research refers to the collection and analysis of numerical data. So in other words, that is data that can be expressed in numbers. They can be used to describe characteristics of something, or they can be used to test associations or relationship between variables. So that's quantitative. Now, the next design is called, the second design, qualitative research. I mean the second approach, qualitative approach. This seeks to gain an in-depth understanding of a topic through words. So basically, is gaining understanding that is based on words, mostly can be transcriptions or from audio interviews, can also be observational in nature. So for instance, this could be things like experiences of people, perceptions, attitudes, or beliefs by individuals on a certain topic. So mostly qualitative research is conducted where a topic has not been explored in details or in depth by researchers. So those are the two main approaches of research, or sometimes they are referred to as qualitative and quantitative designs, but the best way I see them as approaches that will guide us in choosing designs, because we have particular designs under these two approaches. We have designs under quantitative, which include descriptive and analytic. We also have design under the qualitative approach, which could include things like case studies. So we are going to look at all those. So step one, we need to look at our research objectives in order to choose the most appropriate design. We look at our main research objective and also the approach that our study is going to take. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to share my screen. So let me stop sharing this one because it is in Word format. So I hope you can see my screen. So basically we have different action verbs that we can use to describe an objective. So these action verbs can give us an idea on what designs or methods that are appropriate to use. And not only the research objectives, but also we can get an idea of our research design from the research questions. So let's go to the first action verb that we use in our objectives. For instance, say we want to describe. That basically means we want to give a detailed account of something, or we want to give characteristics of something, individual or a group of people. So we have an example here to describe the effects of school dropout among teenagers in District A. So basically, the main purpose of that study is to describe. So the approach that mostly is used in this is mostly quantitative approach, but it can also be qualitative in nature. So the design is called a descriptive study because our main goal is to describe characteristic of something. So the data collection methods that we could use in such a case may vary depending on the kind of approach we use. We could use quantitative alone, qualitative, or we may mix the two, what we call mixed methods. So therefore, I've included all the possible data collection methods when we want to describe a topic. So this could include quantitative questionnaires. We could have focus group discussions, which is a qualitative data collection method, whereby a group of people with a shared understanding of a topic come and discuss it, being facilitated by a skilled moderator. We could also have interviews, which could be both qualitative and quantitative. We could also have observation. Also, when we are describing in an objective, we could also have data collection methods such as frequencies and descriptive statistics, quantitative design. By frequencies and descriptive statistics, I mean we just give the numbers of occurrences of something. For instance, I say the prevalence of cervical cancer in Nairobi is this. So that's a descriptive statistic. The mean age of people affected by cancer is, for instance, 45. That's a descriptive statistic. We could also have median, standard deviations, percentage. So all those are the various statistical methods that we use for the objective whose main purpose is to describe. That is for the case of quantitative. How about if you have a qualitative or an approach where we are showing attributes or using words from transcriptions? So we could have a method such as thematic analysis, where we basically go to our transcription of an audio file. A transcription is basically a written form of an audio file. Maybe you recorded an interview or a focus group discussion and you converted that by listening and writing it down. So thematic analysis tries to find the most common themes from this kind of transcriptions. We can also do content analysis, grounded theories. Those are for qualitative designs. So kindly note that I may not be able to go through all of these things in detail because of time. So our second action verb that we may use in an objective we have assess or evaluate. To assess basically means to gauge the nature of, or quality of something. For instance, I had a training of a group of people in sexual and reproductive health. And now I want to gauge the quality of that training. I say I evaluate that training. So some of the examples of objectives that could show evaluation or assessment are, for instance, to evaluate the effect of sexual and reproductive health rights training on sexual and reproductive health rights uptake among youth in District A, for instance. That is gauging the quality of that training. I could also assess the impact of, we could also say to assess the impact of a road safety training among drivers on road safety practices. So trying to gauge that quality of that training. Also, to gauge, for instance, I want to gauge nature of something. For instance, the nature of knowledge, attitude, and practices on sexual, reproductive health and rights among adolescents in County X. So basically, that's areas we use the words assess or evaluate. And the approach that most of these could follow, it can be quantitative, qualitative, or mixed. So design of this kind of the design of studies with this kind of objectives could be descriptive, because basically you could be interested in only assessing the nature of something or the characteristics of something. So it can be descriptive. It can also be analytic, meaning you are trying to test the relationship between some variables. It could also be a quasi-experiment or an experimental study where we try to evaluate interventions. On data collection method, we have, you may use quantitative questionnaires, but at some point in program evaluation, for instance, you have a training program, you want to evaluate the quality of that program. Most organizations used mixed methodology. Mixed methodology, as I said earlier, means combining both quantitative and qualitative approaches. So mixed methodology is common in program evaluation, especially among the NGOs, where you try to complement information from the quantitative and qualitative. Because sometimes they say quantitative cannot give the whole picture of something. So you may need to triangulate or complement it with the qualitative methods, which include serving the focus group discussions or qualitative interviews. So the mixed methodology could involve use of qualitative interviews and focus group discussions. On data analysis, this could basically include what we call inferential statistics. So inferential statistics basically means we are trying to infer something into the bigger population. Or there are statistical tests that we use to test a hypothesis. So a descriptive study describes, then the study design for analytic or experimental tries to test some relationships between variables. So using a method called inferential statistics. So this could include things like t-test, ANOVA, which is used, we can use to analyze a pre and post intervention data. We could also have frequencies and descriptive statistics where we are evaluating, or also for mixed approach, we may have now the test we use to analyze data analysis or qualitative data analysis. So this could include things like thematic analysis, content analysis, among others. So our next action verb is to examine or analyze. So always remember to carefully choose these words because they mean different things. And they may, as we are seeing right now, they determine what kind of approach you may take. So to analyze or examine means to study something carefully and in detail because you want to find more about it. So it's like a detailed and careful analysis of something. So for instance, if we have an alcohol as a major cause of accident in a town, say town X, and the government is interested in carefully studying the causes of drink driving in this town to get the greater details of the behavior. An example of objective from this could be to examine, the government wants a detailed analysis, the causes of drink driving in that town. So the approach that mostly studies to examine or analyze take, mostly they are quantitative in nature, meaning they are mostly expressed in numbers, but they can also be qualitative or mixed. So the design mostly they are analytical, or what we call explanatory studies. Some books call it correlational studies. Then we have the data collection methods for objective that wants to analyze or examine. This could include quantitative questionnaires and interviews or observations. Could also be secondary data collection, which could be from existing sources such as documents or databases. Data analysis methods could include both descriptive and inferential statistics. So most of these things, these action verbs or objectives may, let me say, may vary because it depends on the specific thing you want to know. Then we have to explore. That's the next action verb that you may use in an objective. So it is used when enough is not known about a phenomenon or topic and a problem that has not been clearly defined. So to explore is basically to have an in-depth study of something. Mostly it happens when only a little is known about a specific topic. So it's absolutely qualitative in nature, that is in terms of the approach. The design, the study design is an exploratory study design. Being qualitative, then that means the data collection methods includes the qualitative data collection methods, which could include having focused discussions and unstructured interviews. So unstructured interviews are interviews where you don't have a schedule. An order in which you are going to ask questions. Data analysis method that you could use to explore could include the identification of themes, what we call thematic analysis, identification of most occurring themes or themes that are common from a qualitative data that we've collected from methods that we've just mentioned, which includes the focus group discussions, the qualitative interviews, and so on. Our last action verb that can be used in an objective is to determine or establish or identify. To determine basically means to discover the facts about something. Examples of objectives that use such kind of action verb. We have one, to determine the pattern of road traffic injuries, for instance, in CTF, to identify the characteristics of something, to establish the pattern of something. So approach mostly objectives. These objectives are used in quantitative research. The design, it can be both descriptive and analytic. For instance, if we want to identify the characteristics of something, for instance, in this example, that could be descriptive. It could also be analytic. For instance, to determine factors influencing maternal mortality, for instance, in a particular hospital. So factors influencing, that means we are going to test some relationships between variables, and therefore that's an analytic study. So don't worry, I'm going to go through the study designs in details. So here we are basically looking at the different action verbs used in objectives and how they could determine the approaches that we use on designs or methods that we use. Data collection methods, we could have quantitative questionnaires, interviews, observations, We could also collect secondary quantitative data, which could be from existing sources such as documents or databases. And the data analysis method, we could perform both descriptive and inferential statistics. So thank you up to that point. In case any of you has a question, the moderator, because this is a recorded Zoom call, the moderator can stop, can pause the video and ask the questions. So let me then go back to our main presentation and take you through the different study designs in detail. So we've completed step one. We've checked the various research objectives, the various action verbs used, and how they could give us an idea on what approaches or methods to choose. Let's now choose our most appropriate study design. I'll start with quantitative designs, or designs that are under the quantitative research approach. So we have what we call the nature or purpose of the study criteria. So there are two main designs under this criteria and under the quantitative design. We have descriptive and analytical studies. So let's go to the first study design called the descriptive study. So a descriptive study, just as the name suggests, is basically concerned with describing the characteristics of something, individual or a group. So they are used to generate hypotheses based on what we know. We can generate hypotheses from them. Now, in another study design that I'm going to discuss after this. So they are basically used to answer what, who, where, and when question. So let me give you an example. For instance, if I ask a question, what are the characteristics of road traffic injuries involving pedestrians in town B? So that means you are interested in identifying those characteristics. So that's a descriptive study. In terms of who, let me give you a sample question on who descriptive question. So we may say, who are the most affected groups? Who are the groups that are most affected by COVID-19 in town C? Then in terms of where, let me give you an example of a where descriptive question. Where do you normally go to worship? So it's a characteristic of that particular element. And when, for instance, when do you normally go to this place, for instance? So basically those are some examples of questions showing descriptive, for the descriptive design. From descriptive now we have analytical or explanatory study. So an analytical or explanatory study is a continuation of our descriptive research. So our descriptive study gives us the state of events. And from this, we may start to come up with some hypotheses. A hypothesis is a presumptive statement which can be tested if true. For instance, we've conducted a descriptive research to understand the characteristics of cervical cancer in, say, CTA. And we've discovered that the most affected age group is age 15 to 44. And now from this descriptive information, we start to develop a hypothesis, which we will test in an analytical study. Now we say that females aged 15 to 44 in town B are the most affected groups in Nairobi. I mean in town B. So that is like a hypothesis. So we may test this. So the descriptive research may give us, may take us to testing a hypothesis about something. So that is on the analytical research. So in analytical research, we don't merely describe, but now we go further. We try to test relationship between variables. So some analytical hypotheses or questions say daily exposure to sun leads to increased levels of happiness. So that's a hypothesis. It could be from a descriptive study. Answer why and how questions. So analytical studies usually answer why and how questions, and this is an example. Why are people with frequent exposure to sun happier than those with less exposure? So that's a why question. You are trying to know why something happens. Sorry. Here, I'm back again to sample descriptive questions. I think it's because of disorganization of one of my slides. So sample descriptive questions, again, I'll add these examples. What are the boda motorcycle related crimes in country X? So the characteristics of this, the characteristics of this topic. What are these crimes? Who are the perpetrators and victims of boda related crimes? Sorry, motorcycle related crimes. So it answers the who question. We are trying to give information on who did something. Where are the boda motorcycle, boda and motorcycle could mean the same thing. So where are the motorcycle related crimes common in country X? So this gives us the descriptive where information. When do most motorcycle related crimes take place in country X? This gives us the place information, or the descriptive place information. So we could also have classify our study design by duration of study. So you find that some studies normally are conducted at one point in time, and some may take long periods, years and years. In medical research or public health research, we have different kinds of studies, which could include both cross-sectional and longitudinal, and also in other sectors, not only in the field of medicine. So one is cross-sectional studies. So these are studies conducted at one point in time. Say you want to conduct a 3-month study and have one, let me say, like one set of measurement. You are using the same questionnaire to measure what you are intended to measure just once. After that study ends, then we have one measurement. Longitudinal studies on other hand, we try to do a study for a long period of time. And this usually involves repeated measures. For instance, as I said, in medicine, we do have in public health research, we do have what we call cohort and case control studies. We could also have longitudinal studies in other sectors. So in longitudinal studies, we do a lot of measurements as opposed to cross-sectional, where we do one set of measurement. Once our study ends, then we have one measurement. Then our last study design under quantitative approach or design is experimental design or study. So experimental studies are also used just as analytic. They're used to test relationship or causal relationship between variables. If a particular variable, for instance, causes an outcome, for instance, the difference between experimental and other kind of studies is that we are trying to manipulate an independent variable and measuring its effect on a dependent variable. Say we have a new cancer vaccine and we want to test it. So we administer this vaccine to subjects or people we want to test these vaccines on. So the variable we are trying to manipulate in this case, for instance, is tumor size. We are trying to, let's say it's a treatment, not a vaccine. Say we want to test a treatment drug on cancer patients. And now we administer these drugs, say drug A and drug B. So one of these drugs is usually used to do a comparison. So suppose we administer these drugs. So we are trying to manipulate an independent variable. In this case, we may have like tumor size. So if we give this treatment drug, we may measure an independent variable called tumor size. And we try to measure the effect of this on dependent variable. For instance, if a person has or has no cancer. So we administer this treatment and monitor these people over some period of time. And that's why sometimes experimental studies could be referred to, could be longitudinal in nature, meaning where we do repeated measurements after we offer an intervention. Even though in most cases, longitudinal studies are considered observational in nature, where we don't manipulate any variable or we don't offer any intervention, we just observe. So subjects are randomly assigned to groups. So we normally have different types of groups. We have treatment, could have control group, which serves as our basis of comparison of an effect of a drug, for instance. So it's usually conducted in a controlled environment, for instance, a lab. So let me give you an example of an experimental study. For instance, our research question, how does the amount of sunlight affect how tall a plant grows? To conduct this study, for instance, a researcher may assign plants into two groups, control and treatment groups. So control group consists of plants that are not exposed to light and serves as a basis of comparison of this variable we are trying to manipulate, or the independent variable. In this case, is the amount of sunlight. So treatment group consists of plants that are exposed to light. In other words, plants where we do, or the plants which we offer and say, let me just call it like an intervention. So we expose a plant to light in the treatment group, then in control, we don't expose the plants in that group to light. In this case, the researcher manipulates the independent variable that we call the amount of light. So the amount of light in this case is the independent variable that we manipulate. So that's all under quantitative designs. Then we therefore have the qualitative designs. So qualitative designs, we do have different kinds of designs, and this include, we have a case study. Maybe you want to understand a specific subject, but you need specific cases. For instance, you want to understand occupational hazards in the construction sector, but you use a specific construction site as a case. So that could be a case study. We could also have what we term as ethnography, where you try to understand the culture of a specific community. Remember, different communities have different cultures. So you may be interested in a particular culture of a community. For instance, why is it that from this particular community, we do have this particular kind of behavior? We do have this particular kind of religious culture. So that could be answered by ethnography study design. Then we have what we call the grounded theory. This is usually used to develop a theory. Maybe you, from the information you gain, you try to develop a particular kind of a theory. Then we have phenomenology, where we aim to understand a phenomenon or an event by describing specific kind of experiences. So remember, we may not be able to go through the details of this because of time. And then the next study design is exploratory study, which we also looked at when checking at the action verbs in objectives. Exploratory research is conducted when enough is not known about a phenomenon or a problem that has not been clearly defined. It as defined by Saunders et al. 2007. It does not aim to provide the final and conclusive answers to the research question, but it will merely explore the research topic with varying levels of depth. Therefore, the main theme of exploratory study is to tackle new problems on which we know little, or which or no previous research has been done. So in other words, when we don't clearly understand our research question. So example of our exploratory research question, for instance, what factors influence mental health in undergraduates in a particular university? For instance, University X. So we may be, maybe this is something that has not been done. So we want to know in details. So after choosing your study design, the specific study design, what next? So the next thing is to choose, before we go to these next steps, I would like to say that your study design, the name of your study design may mostly will be dependent on two factors which we've looked at. One is the nature of this study, which could be to describe, to analyze, to evaluate, as we've looked at, to assess, to identify, to establish, to explore. So that's the nature. And it will also depend on the timing of your study, which could be cross-sectional or longitudinal, as we have said. For instance, you may come up with a study called a descriptive cross-sectional study. So this means 1, this study, the nature is to describe, and 2, this study is going to take place at one point in time, meaning it is cross-sectional. So do remember to consider both factors when naming your study design. Another example is we say we have an analytic cross-sectional study. This means that we have a study that whose purpose is to analyze and is conducted at one point in time. That means it's cross-sectional in nature. So after choosing your study design, now the next step is to choose your target population. After you choose your target population, now choose the appropriate sampling methods. So remember, your design will give you the clue on the standards. For instance, the sampling standards for a descriptive study, we do have them. For instance, the sampling standard for analytic study. So sampling will be based on the study design you choose. That's why we say be keen while choosing your study design, so that you choose the right study design. Choose the appropriate data collection method. Now that you know your design, what is the appropriate data collection method that you should use? For instance, if we have a descriptive cross-sectional study, that gives you a clue that we should have quantitative data collection methods in case your objectives are quantitative in nature. For instance, you have chosen a qualitative study design, say an exploratory design, then our most appropriate data collection methods could include having focus group discussions or even key informant interviews or qualitative interviews. So you see how important it is to choose the right design, because if you choose the right design, then you will choose the most appropriate methods, including sampling methods, data collection methods, and also the data analysis method. So step 6 is to choose the appropriate data analysis methods. And as we've seen while exploring the objectives, data analysis methods vary by objectives. So for instance, to describe and maybe in the objective is seeking to have a quantitative approach, then we may have to basically use the descriptive statistics, which basically describes, including percentages, including the numbers that we have, the mean, for example, the mean age of people in a particular topic you are exploring, the numbers of various genders. So that's descriptive statistics. For analytic design, you may go deeper into advanced statistics or advanced data analysis methods, which could include inferential statistical analysis. And this could include, which could sound a bit technical for some people. We could have inferential methods like we have what we call the t-test, we have ANOVA, we have regression modeling, and many other statistical tests. So basically, these are the key things you need to look at while choosing your study design. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I wish you all the best as you choose your study design. In case you have any question, you can reach to us either via WhatsApp group, or you can reach out to our director who is moderating this discussion. And I wish you a happy weekend.